In the secluded highlands of northern Laos lies a site that is both mysterious and awesome. For across the hilly countryside of the Plain of Jars lie hundreds of gigantic stone vases. Little is known of the peoples who built these megalithic structures more than 2,500 years ago, and even less of their purpose. Yet among the items they contained were glass beads from India, proof that from the earliest times, and even in the remotest locations, there was commercial and cultural contact with India. It was thanks to the sea that this was possible at all. These vast areas of water, turbulent, bewildering, and with unmatched power, frightened man into divine submission, yet also blessed him with favourable winds and currents which gave the possibility of new discoveries. Indeed, this entire part of the maritime world is dominated by the unique feature known as the monsoon, which is brought about by the regular heating and cooling of the Indian subcontinent and the Tibetan plateau. This phenomenon is not only the cause of seasonal heavy rains, but also generates consistent airflows and currents, which, when understood, can be used to travel great distances in relative safety. In fact, some of the earliest evidence of maritime contacts between the two regions is to be found thousands of miles away on the west coast of Italy. The archaeological site of Ostia, to the west of Rome, was once the Roman Empire's most flourishing port, and traces of its extensive contacts with Asia are to be found in its depictions of exotic Asian animals that its sailors and merchants discovered. Ships departing from the port of Ostia would head east to Alexandria laden with silver. This cargo would then be transferred by land to boats waiting in the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf for an onward journey to India, and then further east, perhaps all the way to China. At around the time the Funan kingdom was becoming established, a revolution was sweeping across India. Its name was Buddhism. This is the countryside of the eastern Indian state of Orissa. About 2,000 years ago, a powerful kingdom called Kalinga ruled this region. It was a Buddhist kingdom with extensive trading links with Southeast Asia, which was not surprising considering the proximity of both the sea and of Asia's largest freshwater lake, Lake Chilika, which made it an ideal place for a naval civilization to flourish. The kingdom of Dvaravati, which covered much of central Thailand between the 5th and 10th centuries AD, remains one of the finest examples of the early implantation of Buddhism as a state religion. Early stone inscriptions point to the key role played by Buddhism, not only in bringing a new faith to the region, but in giving its peoples a vital tool for keeping records and communicating with each other. That new tool was writing. This stone inscription in central Vietnam dates back to the 2nd century AD. It is one of the oldest surviving inscriptions of its kind and attests to the early arrival of Indian writing into the region. These circular letters that once marked old parchments and stone tablets today brighten up street signs, billboards and posters, and they are a direct consequence of maritime exchanges with India. Most scripts came with the arrival of Buddhist monks using the Indian Pallava script. However, since this was introduced into different parts of Southeast Asia at different moments in history, today the region boasts a variety of distinct alphabets. The monumental scale of Ayutthaya in Thailand is a perfect example of how kings conferred legitimacy on themselves by building grand Buddhist edifices that at once awed and humbled their subjects. In the eyes of ordinary people, their kings were not just rulers, they were custodians of the faith. When the earliest Indian Buddhist monks reached Southeast Asia, they likely came across markets, very much like this one, teeming with people and a variety of natural products and handicrafts, which would have astounded the visitors. For traders accompanying the monks, it was apparent that goods could be procured here to be sold back in India, but that these were also markets for Indian products. Yet there are always little signs of cultural contacts. The Parasurameshwar temple in Bhubaneswar in Orissa has a relief of an Indonesian with his distinctive headgear and his traditional dagger called the kris. There are more depictions of goods being shipped from Southeast Asia. Over the centuries, of all the products to be exchanged between India and Southeast Asia, one would come to define the very staple of commerce: textiles. From the Red Sea to the Spice Islands, Indian textiles clothed entire populations. Indian weavers had long been able to sell their brightly coloured, richly patterned textiles to both the East and the West. Textiles from Gujarat, known as patolas and calicos, with their intricately woven designs, were particularly prized by Southeast Asian elites, who were known to have paid for these goods in gold. It is said that Gujarati cloth merchants, who would successfully return from Java, usually made enough money to allow their family members to live in luxury for at least 3 generations. One of the main ways of dyeing textiles in India's east coast is the tie and dye technique that was imported from Indonesia more than 1,000 years ago. It is a living legacy of the many ancient contacts between the two regions. While India was exporting its textiles throughout Southeast Asia, it was also importing Southeast Asian silk. Producing silk is a complex process that Southeast Asians had mastered long before the Indians. It involves harvesting the silkworms, helping the cocoons to grow, and extracting the threads to produce fine fabric. Cambodia played an important role in the export of silk to India, and this farm is trying to revive the silk production traditions of its ancestors, who had traded with India centuries ago. The shift of trade to India's southern coasts is significant because the powers of the south were Hindu, and their dominance represented Hindu revivalism in India. It was this revivalism that would be exported to Southeast Asia. One of the first Tamil kingdoms to take to the seas was the kingdom of the Pallavas. Part of their port in Mahabalipuram now lies underwater, but sufficient remains to suggest that these were devout kings bent on exporting Hinduism as much as promoting trade. The bare stone temples here contrast with the vividness of this massive bas-relief, depicting a scene from the Mahabharata, which clearly indicate that the 2 great Hindu myths of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana had by the 6th century AD been carefully developed. Little is known about the origins and eventual fate of the Pallava rulers, but in the second half of the first millennium they established maritime contacts with the Malay Peninsula, Java, Sumatra and Cambodia, leaving behind Hindu temples and Tamil trading communities in all these areas. But their most lasting impact is perhaps to be found in central Vietnam, in the kingdom of Champa, which it is said was administered by Hindu councillors from India and where the court language was Sanskrit. Hindu revivalism in Southeast Asia was so extensive, it was largely due to the policies of South India's greatest maritime kingdom, that of the Cholas. The growth of the Cholas in the 9th century AD had come at the expense of the Pallavas, but from their seat of power here in the area of Tanjore, they continued the Pallava policy of trading with Southeast Asia and exporting Hinduism. And to this end, they sponsored a system of merchant guilds to promote maritime commerce on both coasts of India. To secure maritime sea routes for its merchant guilds, the Cholas also developed one of the largest navies India had ever seen. The fleet was based here in Kaviripatnam, on India's southeast coast. Today, there are no signs left of the Cholas' naval power. However, in 1025 AD, a fleet of more than 25 ships departed from this very spot to attack the kingdom of Srivijaya in Sumatra. The narrative of King Rajendra Chola's expedition to Sumatra is mentioned in the inscriptions of the Pragat Ishwar temple in Tanjore. In a matter of weeks, his naval forces had crossed the seas and destroyed the gates of Palembang, capturing the Srivijayan king and delivering the first of a series of blows that would prove fatal for the Sumatran kingdom. Never before had the Indian Ocean witnessed such a massive naval operation over such large distances. Today, after 2 millennia of sustained commercial contacts and cultural exchanges between India and Southeast Asia, the two regions are once again at the forefront of Asia's rapid economic growth. In Southeast Asia, countries such as Singapore are already a model of prosperity and thrive on a unique blend of Asian cultures and civilizations. The contribution of the local Indian communities to this success has also played an important role in sustaining the links between the two regions. In 1967, with the creation of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, to consolidate the economic development and stability of the region, India today sees new opportunities for its age-old links to flourish once again. Over the years, there has been a significant rise in the volume of trade, with many goods being sent by sea, as they were centuries earlier. As India's relations with Southeast Asia begin to grow, once again free from the shackles of post-colonial trauma, their common past and shared culture will prove more than ever to be a source of mutual understanding and respect at the dawn of a new millennium.